Do you want to breed stunning Bosmani rainbowfish like this in your own home aquarium? Well, if so, then keep watching because I'm going to show you exactly how I do it here at Net Aquatics. Welcome back to Net Aquatics, fish freaks. In this video, we are going to be breeding Bosemani Rainbowfish, one of my favorite fish. I have bred so many of them. They have been one of my favorite fish since I was very young, just a beautiful fish. And as you can see, they're actually the fish that I have behind me in this 5-foot tank that I have in my living room. There's a lot of misconceptions about breeding rainbowfish and Bosmanis in particular, so I'm going to try and break some of those down and explain how I do things and why I do things. With that said, guys, this is how I do it. There's lots of ways you can do it. You can do it in ponds, you can do it in tanks, you can do it with acrylic yarn, you can do it with Java moss. Before we get into the steps on how we can breed these awesome Bosmani rainbowfish, it's probably important to actually talk about them a little bit and go through the tank conditions that we need to actually keep and breed these guys. The first most important thing is going to be tank temperature, which I like to keep my tank around 24 to 26 degrees. They can tolerate all the way up to 28 degrees, maybe even 30 at a stretch, but I find that the hotter it is, the more active they are and the less oxygen you can keep in the water. And these guys here need a lot of oxygen, which is actually probably the second most important thing. Bosmani rainbowfish come from very oxygen rich lakes and streams because it's very fast flowing where the tributaries and stuff all connect. You need to make sure you've got a lot of flow in the tank and a lot of air. You can do this by using a wave maker or a pump return like what I have here, or you can use a spray bar or an air stone, something like that. You just need to make sure you've got a lot of air in the tank. These guys are very active and they never really stop. So you'll probably see them sometimes doing this little thing where they kind of twist or turn or do this little gasping looking motion. It's very distinct. If you see them doing this, this can mean one of two things. One is that there's not enough oxygen in the tank. They need more. And two is that the biofiltration in the tank is also lacking. If you see them doing this little maneuver, it's not immediately concerning, but it can mean that they are living in suboptimal conditions, which you don't really want when you're trying to breed the fish. So with temperature and oxygen out of the way, let's move into the other tank parameters such as pH, KH, GH, and all that fun stuff. For pH, these guys are very hardy fish. They like pH anywhere from 7 all the way up to 8. So they are very hard water fish, which is funny because a lot of the rainbow fish that you can get here in Australia and in New Guinea, you know, all those places, they are quite soft water fish, some of them even black water fish. So when you think of rainbow fish, you probably think of tannin creeks, rivers, stuff like that. These guys actually come from lakes and rivers that have a lot of limestone, they have a lot of vallisneria, a lot of cryptochlorines, the water's always running, there's a lot of stones, so they come from very hard, alkaline, oxygenated rivers. So what we need to do is we need to mimic that with our pH. For GH, you're probably going to want to set it anywhere between 9 and 12. They can tolerate all the way up to 20, but I find that that's just a little bit too hard and you start having more issues than it's really worth when the water is that hard. For KH, we just want it to be anywhere between maybe 4 to 7. We just want it to be high enough to buffer our really high KH. You can do this by using coral, you can do this by using remineralizers, salty shrimp, GH, KH, whatever you choose to use, but just make sure that you don't change the parameters too quick on the fish because they are quite sensitive to osmotic shock and thermal shock. Osmotic shock being when it messes up with their osmoregulation, and thermal shock being a result of temperatures swinging too fast, whether it be too hot or too cold. So slow water changes for these guys as well. In terms of sexing these guys, it's very easy. The boys are always going to display a blue head and a orange or yellow tail, and the color and pigment of these can change depending on the species and the condition of the fish, but the boys will always be far more orange and far more blue than the females. Almost a vertical stripe right down the middle. The females can get very colorful still. They'll get on this yellow, bronze, green kind of hue. It's really awesome and they kind of shine in the light, but they won't get that two-tone split that you'll get with the males, which makes them pretty easy to sex. At early ages, it can be a little bit harder, so it's best to wait really for the colors to come in, but eventually the boys will far outgrow the females. The male Bosmanis can get very big. They can get anywhere up to 13 centimeters. I've seen massive Bosmanis. There was a Bosmani that I seen down in Brisbane that was probably around 7 inches. It was a very big fish. I'd love to know how old the fish was, but some of my fish are pretty old themselves. Some of them are getting up to around 3 to 4 years old, and you know, my biggest boy is probably around 10 to 11 centimeters, so he's getting up there. He's a big fish, and as I say, they can get bigger. In terms of husbandry, these guys are very docile fish, so they can kind of live with any other other fish. The only thing that I would recommend and steer you guys away from is keeping them with any kind of neocaridina or caridina shrimp, you know, the Davidized shrimp. You don't really want to keep them. When the Bosmanis are small, they're not going to eat the fish, but when they get to this size, they most definitely will eat the little shrimp and maybe even the parent shrimp. And the last thing you want to see is a Bosmani floating at the surface because he tried to eat a shrimp and it's hanging out his mouth because he couldn't eat it. So steer clear from any kind of micro shrimp with these guys. Anything like Amanos are fine. Anything like long arm shrimps, Macrobrachium australiensis, they're fine. But yes, any dwarf micro shrimps, steer clear when you're keeping them with Bosmanis. Bosmanis can do well with long-finned fish as well. So any kind of tetra, long-finned plecos or bristlenose, angelfish, any of these fish, they can be kept with. I wouldn't really keep them with angelfish too much though, because angelfish require different water parameters and different heats. I have some angelfish in here because I actually rehomed them from a mate. So they're just kind of chilling in here for now. That pretty much covers everything you need to know about Bosmanis and how to keep them. In terms of what they eat, they are omnivorous. So they will eat both proteinous diets and herbivorous diets. But I find that they are more carnivorous than they are omnivorous. And more often than not, they will prefer any kind of, you know, pellet or frozen food than they will any kind of vegetable-based food. That said, they will take vegetables such as shelled green peas, blanched kale, you know, your veggie classics that you can get, you know, the frozen veggie classics. They will eat anything like that. They love spirulina-based foods as well. Algae wafers, spirulina-based tabs. They'll eat all of that. And we're going to talk more about that right now in our first step, which is going to be step 1, conditioning. So the first step to breeding Bosemani rainbowfish is to condition our pair or our colony to actually be ready to breed. Bosmani rainbowfish are very, very, very energetic fish, so they're always burning a lot of calories swimming around and being very social and flaring. Because of this, we need to make sure that we feed them a lot of food because they are just absolute gluttons. They will eat absolutely everything. With that said, they do really well with a bit of green in their diet, like shelled peas and stuff like that. So conditioning is going to be our first step. I'm going to break it down for you what I feed my Bosmani and what I found works best and what I would probably avoid. The foods that I personally would recommend are things like a good pellet food or a good wafer, bug bites, anything like that, any kind of small granular food. The protein amount doesn't matter too much. Anywhere from 38 all the way up to around 48% protein is pretty good. But if you are going to feed them a high protein diet to get the best color and the best conditioning, we also need to make sure that we condition them regularly with good veggies as well, because they are prone to bloat, similar to Malawi cichlids. The best foods to feed your fish if you want to really get the best conditioning would be things like NLS Terra A, things like Hikari pellets, things like shelled green peas, frozen daphnia, frozen brine shrimp, frozen mysis shrimp. These are all really, really good options. They're high in carotenoids, really good protein. They're high in fiber if you're feeding the daphnia, like lots of roughage. So these are all really good options. Again, though, if you are going to feed them a high protein diet, make sure that you feed them shelled green peas every maybe 3 to 4 days. They will take to it pretty easily. They seem to like the taste. Mine go absolutely crazy for them. The shelled green peas help the fish to digest and move their bowels so that they don't end up this wide and extremely fat. If you feed them high protein non-stop, eventually they may suffer from bloat-like symptoms or even dropsy, and then they will die. Just feed them as much as they'll eat within 1 to 2 minutes just watching them, and try to feed them small amounts instead of just dumping it in the tank. Rainbow fish really love eating at the top of the water column, and as the food sinks, they may decide not to go for it as they want to just wait for more food to be dropped in the top. They may eventually go and start eating it later on, but for the most part, try and feed them slowly, 1 to 2 minutes with those foods that I mentioned, and you should be pretty good. And now let's look into some of the foods that you should definitely avoid, in my opinion, and through my experience with trial and error. As I said, this is my opinion. So the number 1 food to avoid, it's going to be bloodworms. While some species like discus, apistogrammas, etc. really benefit from a heavy protein diet and high fats like bloodworms, blackworms, things like that, these guys here will bloat very, very quickly if you feed them too much bloodworms. Similar to rams, they don't seem to be able to digest it very well, and it just isn't the best food. If I feed them bloodworms, it's only very seldom if the boys are looking a little bit sad. If you want to feed them bloodworms or something that's very similar, you can feed them Hikari Vibra bites, as they are made to literally mimic bloodworms, and they are probably a little bit better for the gut. However, yeah, I just wouldn't feed them bloodworms. They don't seem to do well with them. I've had fish die when I've fed them bloodworms in the past. Another food to avoid is any pellet that is high in any kind of filler, any kind of fish meal, stuff like that. You want to get foods that have whole ingredients that have just been made into a pellet. Things with spirulina, things with garlic, things with krill krill, things with shrimp. All of these are really good ingredients that you want in your product, and you want to just avoid high amounts of fillers in your food. That's just going to constipate your fish, and they're going to get bloated, and they unfortunately aren't going to breed. And so now we've been feeding them the right foods, we've avoided the wrong foods, we're feeding them maybe 1 to 2 times a day, depending on the fish and how many you have. How do we know when they're ready to breed? How do we know that our conditioning has worked? Well, it's actually pretty easy to tell in rainbow fish. Rainbow fish are egg scatterers, meaning they just go into a mop or vegetation, and the female and the male will shimmy up against each other in a kind of courtship display. The female will drop her eggs, and the male fish will drop his milk to fertilize the eggs. Because of this, the female rainbow fish, they drop quite a few eggs. It can be anywhere from 10 to 30, 40 eggs from one female in my experience. Depends on the species of rainbow fish, but for Bosmani, that's what I find. Because of this, the rainbow fish females actually will get quite chunky when they're full of eggs. You will actually be able to see their bodies get quite gravid. You won't see any kind of gravid spot or anything like that because the fish are obviously not see-through. They're very opaque, so you're not going to be able to see the eggs inside the fish, but the fish will get wider in the body, which will tell you that the females are egg-bound and breeding can occur if you want to pop your spawning mops in. With the males, it's pretty easy to tell. The males will constantly swim around and harass the females, shimmy them into any breeding mops or into any foliage, and then they'll do their thing. The boys will probably also spar against each other pretty often, which is an awesome display, and one of the key benefits of having rainbow fish in your tank is to see these awesome morning displays where the boys are all going crazy, flaring up against each other, and the colors are at their absolute peak. The boys are pretty horny little fish, so once they get to, you know, yay kind of size, 5 centimeters, that's when you can kind of expect them to start breeding. But if you want the best breeding, you're going to want to wait for them to be fully grown, which is probably going to take around 12 months from egg. That's when they reach sexual maturity for me, and I've noticed that they really pick up their egg dropping. They will lay pretty early on in their life cycle, but the quality of the eggs in terms of fertility and the amount that you get, that's what's going to depend between a younger fish and an older fish. So that concludes our conditioning step. To recap one last time, we want to feed them with good high quality pellet foods, flake foods, or bug bite. We want to feed them shelled green peas or any kind of spirulina veggie food, and we want to avoid any high fatty foods like bloodworms. Live blackworms are okay, and also feed them 1 to 2 times a day, once in the morning, once at night. Feed them only what they eat, and make sure that you feed them slowly, small amounts over the feeding period, so that no food sinks to the bottom and decays in your tank, which could lead to fouling water parameters. So fish freaks, that's going to bring us into step 2, which is going to be actually spawning the fish or having them lay some eggs for us in whatever spawning media we choose. If you guys are paying attention, you would have heard me reference spawning mops earlier, and that's what I prefer to use for my Bosemani Rainbowfish. I just use the regular, you know, acrylic yarn. Make sure that if you're going to make these yourself, that the wool you use or the yarn you use, make sure it's 100% acrylic or 100% plastic. Don't use cotton, don't use polyester, don't use anything like that, because these can be organic material and they will break down in the tank. So they're not gonna last forever, and if you miss one or just like to leave them in there for a bit longer to season them a bit, they will break down if they are not acrylic. So how do you actually use the acrylic mops? Well, there's a couple of different ways that I like to use them, and I've kind of changed my tactics over the years of breeding Bosmanis. When I first started breeding Bosmanis, I used to use breeding mops made out of black yarn, and they were just floating mops. I used to use only 1 to 2 of them, and I used to get very good results, but a lot of the time I would notice the Bosmanis would actually get to the eggs before I could. So what I started to do was use thicker green floating mops, and I use them in tandem with sinking mops as well. To make a sinking mop, all you really do is just get some yarn, tie it together the same way you would a normal mop, and then fill it up with some tank water by squishing it, and eventually it'll just sink down. This kind of mimics a Java moss or a Java matting, or even small cryptocoreans and stuff like that. These kind of mimic where they would lay in the wild, where they would swim through Vallisneria, cryptocorene, stuff like that. So it's very good to use a combination of both floating and sinking mops. These fish spawn the best at first light, when the light is only just coming up. So what that means is, if you have your fish tank light set to turn on at around 7 o'clock in the morning, and then you come out at say 7:15, guess what? The fish have probably already eaten all of the egg, because if there's ambient room light, say you have windows, maybe a TV, maybe you turn the kitchen light on, the toilet light on before the tank turns on, anything like that, if the room lights up ambiently, that's the spawning trigger. That's what they're going to use to say, all right, let's get into it and lay our our eggs. If your tank light turns on abruptly like that, that light may be too much of a shock and they will eventually spawn, but it'll take a little bit after the light turns on. So what I usually find is if the room is gradually getting lighter throughout the morning, I will come out and wait to see the spawning behaviors, and then I will take the mops out of the tank. That way I don't lose as many eggs to the parents eating them. It's very important that when we pick out the eggs from our spawning mops, that we only pick out the fertile eggs, which are going to be very translucent, yellow, kind of shiny. They're going to look very, very nice. The infertile eggs, they're going to look a little bit duller, a little bit more white. They're not going to be white, but they will be just a little bit milky. You'll tell the difference pretty easily, and once you do this enough times, you'll get a really good eye for it. You don't want to put those infertile eggs with our fertile eggs because they may, fall prey to funguses or pests, and those pests may decide to prey on the fertile eggs as well. Saprolegnia especially usually won't infect fertile eggs unless there's infertile eggs next to them that they can feed off of to get their little colony started. So with that said, we now know how to spawn these guys. All we need to do is put in our floating mops and our sinking mops, or Java fern, Vallisneria, cryptochlorine, any kind of stuff like that. And then in the morning, we can harvest our eggs. If you harvest twice a day, once in the morning, once at night, this is how you can get the optimal collection rate for your fish, because some of the fish may not spawn in the morning spawning event and they may hold off till later on so that there's not as much spawning competition. And that's going to lead us into step 3, fish freaks. Step 3, and this is where things start getting really exciting, so hold on to your steak and cheese because this is about to go crazy. We've got our mops in there, our fish are conditioned, they're going crazy, the boys are flaring, the girls are dropping eggs. So what do we want to do now? How do we actually hatch them out? I'm sure a lot of people have gotten to this stage with rainbow fish and they just never seem to be able to get the eggs to hatch. So what's the secret? Well, the secret's way more simpler than what everyone else makes it out to be. These fish need very clean, oxygenated water for the eggs to hatch. What that means is if you have them in a tank with high nitrates or high ammonia or high detritus are on the bottom, there's lots of fish poop, uneaten food, maybe there's some scavengers in there, you've got some catfish, opportunistic fish, your eggs will never hatch in the tank. They just will never hatch. That's the reality of it. These eggs can take 1 to 7 days and even longer in colder water. So you have to ask yourself, if they lay the eggs in my tank, what's the odds of the eggs surviving the 7 days to actually hatch out? Pretty slim, right? So what we actually want to do is we want to take out our spawning mops and we want to look through them, as we mentioned in step 2, and pick out the rainbow fish eggs. Just with your fingers, just pick out the rainbow fish eggs. It's going to seem scary. You're going to think, oh, I don't want to break them. I don't want to crush them. But trust me, these little guys are actually pretty strong. Unless you really put some pressure on them, they're not going to pop. And put them in your finger so that you can feel that they're there. You'll feel them on the pad of your finger. What we want to do is we then want to just dip our finger into a little bowl or a little dish full of the same tank water. And this is where we'll put our eggs that we want to move into our hatching incubator. Go through your acrylic yarn mops, pick out all of your eggs, put them in your little harvesting container, and then we will take that harvesting container and put it into the incubator that we've chosen. Now, personally, I like to use little 20-liter bins or little 20-liter tanks. All I do is put a little aerator in there. I water change the water so much that there's never really any chance for any ammonia, nitrite, or nitrate to build in these little tubs. On top of that, I'll tell you a little trick later on so that we don't fungus out all of our eggs by feeding the fry in these tubs. This is a very important trick, so make sure you stick around for that. But before then, if this video has helped you out or you've liked this video on breeding Bosmani in your own home, splash the subscribe button to become a fish freak because I upload weekly content that you don't want to miss. So the container or the incubator that we're putting our eggs in, we also want to make sure that it's the same temperature as our main display tank or our breeding tank. You can do this by putting a little heater in there, 10, 25 watt heater. Set the temperature to the same temperature just to keep our eggs warm, because I have noticed that in colder water, the eggs do take longer, and the longer the eggs take, the longer we have to keep them clean. The longer we have to keep them clean, the more chance we have of them dying. If you manage to keep the tubs nice and clean for 1 to 7 days, your eggs are going to hatch out and you're going to have yourself some tiny little baby Bosemani. These guys are super fragile. We're going to want to make sure that we grow them out correctly. So that's going to lead us into step 4, which is our grow out stage. This is the riskiest stage, but it's also the most rewarding, and it's the final stage really into growing our fish. Once our little eggs have hatched in that incubator bin that we set up with the same temperature, we're not adding any food in there, remember, it's just the eggs, and we're water changing this bin every 1 to 2 days by around 15 to 20%. Once our little guys have hatched out, it's very important that you don't feed them in the same bin that they hatch in, or that there's other eggs still in. The reason for this is the minute you start adding a little bit of food in there, even a small amount, you're inviting ammonia, nitrite, and nitrates into your little hatching tub, which is of course going to feed the bacteria and fungus, which will predate on our eggs as well. We don't want that. We want to keep our incubators sterile. So then how do we feed the fish if we can't feed them in the bin that they're hatching in? The solution is actually pretty simple. All we need to do is take the little fry out by catching them in a little cup of water and move them to another tank, which is the tank that we will feed them and grow them out in. By doing this, we're making sure that we can feed the brand new delicate fry who are going to need to be fed pretty quick and a lot of food without damaging the rest of the eggs who have yet to hatch. Again, if we feed the fry in the same bin that we hatch them in, there is a risk that we're going to crash out all the other eggs. And even if you have a sponge filter in there or good biofiltration, I find that it just doesn't help. And even methylene blue just doesn't seem to help either. I'm sure a lot of people have success with these, but I have a really high hatch rate by doing this, with around 70 Bosmanis hatching out from one egg clutch, which was just insane. I had Bosmanis just going everywhere. So there are other ways you can do it, but this is how I do it. And I find that keeping the water sterile works far better than trying to sterilize the water, right? And so once we've moved our little fish to our grow out tank, it can be a little 60 liter, it can be a little 20 liter. It really just depends on how many fish you have. The first food we're going to feed them is going to be a powdered fry food. My personal favorite is Hikari First Bites. Link is in the description if you guys are in Australia and want to pick some up. And all I do is just mix it into a container with some tank water and then pipette it into the areas where the fry are. You want to make sure that you put the food where the fry are, because you don't want to make the fry have to go to the food. Any extra movement that we're giving the fry is extra energy and calories they're consuming that they should be spending on growing and keeping healthy. A lot of people will just put fry sprinkled on the water, and these little fry are tiny, and the effort it takes to get to the food, it's not even worth eating the food that they get. So that's what we do. We give them a powdered fry food in water and we feed it directly to where the fry are feeding. Once they get a little bit bigger, they can move on to baby brine shrimp, and eventually they can move on to granule foods, bug bites, or pretty much anything. They get pretty big and they tolerate a lot of foods. Early on, they seem to tolerate protein better, so I don't have to give these guys green peas. You only really have to give them green peas in the conditioning phase. In the grow out phase, they just want to be fed small amounts multiple times a day, because these fish are very active and they're very small. So they have small stomachs and they're going to poop more, so they're going to need to eat more, right? So I find 2 to 3 feedings a day works best, whether it be with the powdered food or the baby brine shrimp if they're at that stage. Feed them 2 to 3 times a day to get the optimal growth. After around a month to a month and a half, these little guys are going to be at around 2 to 3 centimeters, which is where they start becoming a sellable size. I personally like to sell them at around 4 centimeters, because that's when you can start kind of getting the sexual dimorphisms to know who's who, which is a male and which is a female. You can either hold them so that they get bigger and are therefore worth more money. The boys will display the iconic blue and orange, or you can sell them for a little bit cheaper at that juvenile size of around 2 to 3 centimeters. It's really up to you, but I would never keep too many in one grow out tank, because eventually they will outcompete each other for food. So I would only really keep around 20 of these fish in a 3-footer at any given time, maybe 30. They are going to get quite competitive for the food, so keep that in mind. These guys eat a lot, they move a lot, they poop a lot, and they can be a little bit aggressive towards each other when it comes to food aggression. So fish freaks, that is going to do it for this video. If this was really helpful, then splash the subscribe button as per normal. These are one of my favorite fish. Bosmanis are absolutely stunning. They have so much personality. They get to a good size. They are very docile, you know, really good husbandry, and in big display tanks, they are just unbeatable when it comes to color and freshwater fish. So absolutely one of my favorite fish. If you guys like them too, splash the like button as well. This is actually going to be part of a series that I'm doing, which is breeding every single freshwater fish. It's a massive undertaking, so there's going to be a lot of content, but I think we can do it, fish freaks. For now, that's going to be it, and the next video is going to be on breeding Pseudomugil gertrudae, otherwise known as spotted blue eyes. So look forward to that one, guys.